I want you to hit me as hard as you can.
Hey gang, Jesse Shade from Awfully Good Movies here, and as I look back on the past decade of the 2010s and all the top 10 worst movies list I've done over the past few years, it's amazing how much things have evolved. Back in 2014, I merely selected the 10 lowest rated major movies on IMDb for that past year, but the year after that, we started having the JoBlo.com community voting on what they thought were the 10 worst movies of 2015. And in 2016, we decided to safeguard our voting system against internet trollery by shuffling around the ranking of the top 10 after adding together the film scores on Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb, and dividing that sum by the percentage of readers who voted for each of those films. So now that's the same process we're using today to count down the top 10 worst movies of 2019. A truly transformative year in film history that saw the rise of the streaming wars, the defeat of Thanos at the hands of the Avengers, the beginning of the Joker, the end of the Skywalker saga, and one of the few occurrences of a film studio constructively using fan outrage to take those goddamn teeth out of Sonic the Hedgehog's mouth and into Eddie Murphy's Sonic the Hedgehog cake.
And are those human teeth in its mouth?
Yes, that is correct. The teeth are human.
But since we like to get these worst movies of the year videos out in time for New Year's, that means we can't get every bad movie from the past year onto our list, which is why Holmes and Watson avoided going onto the list last year. So don't bother asking why our list doesn't include Playmobil the movie, the Black Christmas remake, The Rise of Skywalker, or especially those godforsaken singing cat people. Without further ado, JoBlo.com and Awfully Good Movies present your picks for the top 10 worst movies of 2019, which weren't cats. Number 10, Terminator: Dark Fate. It was a mere 4 years ago when Paramount Pictures first tried rebooting the Terminator franchise with Terminator Genesys, with Arnold Schwarzenegger staying true to his famed catchphrase and coming back to the series after a 12-year hiatus, and James Cameron himself giving his stamp of approval to the film as the true sequel to his first 2 installments. But with Genesys landing on our worst movies list for 2015, it was evident that audiences and critics largely disagreed with Mr. Cameron's opinion, as well as his taste in shirts.
Look, it's a sailboat. You saw it too, damn it!
So for this reboot of the Terminator franchise, James Cameron finally returned to the series as both a producer and co-writer, at the behest of Deadpool director Tim Miller. And in addition to Schwarzenegger once again returning as the elderly T-800, we also had Linda Hamilton finally returning to the role of Sarah Connor, as well as Edward Furlong providing his CGI likeness to return as the young John Connor for the first 5 minutes of the movie before he gets killed by another evil Terminator.
Terminated.
So that means it's now up to the older Sarah Connor to protect a young Mexican immigrant who will serve as the new leader of the Resistance, with Gabriel Luna as the advanced evil Terminator sent to kill the future Resistance leader, and Mackenzie Davis as the human-cyborg hybrid sent to help Sarah Connor kill off this latest cyborg baddie. But although Dark Fate would be hailed by many Terminator fans to be the best film since the second one, that still wasn't saying much. And for most moviegoers, it was too little and too late, with the sixth Terminator bypassing the chance to tell a wholly original story with exciting new characters worth rooting for, so that it could instead play on the same tired story beats and overused catchphrases
I'll be back
from the original 2 Terminators, which was due in part to the behind-the-scenes creative conflicts between James Cameron and Tim Miller that were fully evident in the final product. If it's true that there is no fate but what we make for ourselves, then the Terminator franchise has made itself a truly dark fate this time around, and will hopefully not be back anytime soon. Besides, if I want to see a lady Terminator, then I'll just stay home and watch Lady Terminator.
Yeah, eat it, you bitch!
Number 9. Gemini Man. The past year has been an exciting one for the usage of de-aging technology in movies, whether it was a fresh-faced Samuel L. Jackson fighting alongside Captain Marvel, or Robert De Niro aging 6 decades over the course of 3.5 hours in The Irishman. But one of the most ambitious uses of this technology was in the latest film from 2-time Oscar-winning auteur Ang Lee, starring Will Smith as a retired assassin whose former agency orders him to be killed off by their newest assassin, who just so happens to be a biologically engineered clone of Will Smith. with Big Willie digitally de-aged back to his Fresh Prince days thanks to the miracles of CGI. In fact, the script for this movie had been circulating around Hollywood for over 2 decades, with 30 of Hollywood's biggest stars attached to its lead dual role, only for production to keep getting shut down because the de-aging technology hadn't yet been perfected. But while technology may have finally caught up to visualize this film's revolutionary concept, Gemini Man was still as loud and stupid as you would expect from a Jerry Bruckheimer production, as the lackluster script could not be saved by numerous rewrites from high-profile screenwriters. Plus, Ang Lee was insistent on filming the movie in a high frame rate of 120 frames per second, and much like his last experiment with high frame rate cinema, the end result ended up looking less like a theatrical motion picture and more like a Mexican soap opera. And as impressive as Will Smith's de-aging effects truly were, it was obvious by the film's final few minutes that the effects budget was starting to bottom out.
Damn.
So since After Earth obviously didn't teach Will Smith that audiences don't want to see him sharing the screen with a younger version of himself in a futuristic sci-fi flick, and that first Hulk movie didn't teach Ang Lee to stay away from big budget action blockbusters, then let's hope that the failure of Gemini Man will be a valuable lesson for both of these men. Hell, since Nick Nolte was one of the actors originally attached to this movie, maybe Ang Lee would have been better off reuniting with him for this movie. Oh my god, what the hell happened to me?
I don't know, goddammit. Oh, goddammit. I have spoken.
Number 8, The Lion King. The Disney company has had themselves one hell of a 2019, with Avengers Endgame now becoming the highest grossing movie of all time, and Disney Plus quickly gaining a head start in the streaming wars. But Disney had a more mixed track record with this year's remakes of its animated classics, with Tim Burton's Dumbo and the Maleficent sequel proving to be underwhelming disappointments, while the studio found more success with not just Guy Ritchie's live-action Aladdin, but also Jon Favreau's CGI animated remake of The Lion King, which came 25 years after the original Lion King became a watershed moment for Disney's animation renaissance. And for his digitally re-envisioned version, Jon Favreau brought in some of today's biggest stars to add some fresh life to the story's iconic characters, with the exception of James Earl Jones returning as the voice of Mufasa. But even with Favreau's Lion King now becoming the highest grossing animated movie of all time, it left many Disney fans and film critics feeling none too happy with watching the same damn movie all over again, except it's now 30 minutes longer with more realistic animated animals that had little of the beauty of the original 2D animation. And even though Sir Elton John was brought back to remix his Oscar-winning songs for the new version, he would later deride the new Lion King as a huge disappointment where all the magic and joy of the original were lost. But who could blame him for feeling that way after listening to Chiwetel Ejiofor sleepwalk his way through one of the best Disney villain songs of all time?
So prepare for the coup of the century. Yes, my teeth and ambitions are bared. Be prepared.
That's not singing, that's talking with style, although it is admittedly easier to listen to than Will Smith.
Prince Ali, fabulous he,
So if Martin Scorsese wants to criticize Disney for filling movie theaters with theme park ride movies, I'd say that unnecessary and uncreative remakes like The Lion King are far more deserving targets than the Marvel movies. As for Jon Favreau, he's already made up for this blunder with the runaway success of The Mandalorian. Now if only he could have gotten Baby Yoda to star in The Lion King remake. Better movie that would have been! Number 7, The Haunting of Sharon Tate. One of the best movies of this past year was Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Quentin Tarantino's epic love letter to 60s-era Hollywood set against the real-life backdrop of the Manson family's brutal murder of actress Sharon Tate and her unborn baby with director Roman Polanski in the summer of 1969. But the tragic story of Sharon Tate also served as the basis for one of the worst movies of this year that came out only a few months before Tarantino's movie, which was based upon a claim by Hollywood columnist Dick Kleiner that Sharon Tate told him about a premonition she had of her murder before she was actually murdered by the Mansons. And where Tarantino had Margot Robbie in the role of Sharon Tate, The Haunting of Sharon Tate also had one of our finest working actresses playing the role of the doomed starlet, Hilary Duff. Yep, Lizzie McGuire herself. If only they could have gotten Shia LaBeouf to play Charles Manson.
Do it!
But regardless of who played Sharon Tate in this movie, they could only do so much with this cheap and exploitative schlocker that felt more like a dramatic reenactment from an Unsolved Mysteries episode than a legitimate feature film. And while some may have criticized Tarantino for his outrageous alternate history ending, that was nothing compared to The Haunting of Sharon Tate's ending, where the pregnant Sharon Tate and her friends decide to fend off the Manson family themselves. That's like if Tarantino had ended Once Upon a Time in Hollywood by ripping off the ending to Death Proof. So The Haunting of Sharon Tate would prove to be an unfortunate career turn for the film's writer-director, Daniel Farrens, who had previously directed some fantastic documentaries on both the Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street franchises, and also wrote the screenplay for Halloween 6: The Curse of Michael Myers. And as if a movie about Sharon Tate saving herself from the Manson family wasn't enough, Daniel's next directorial effort will be an alternate history of the murder of Nicole Brown Simpson, where O.J. Simpson didn't do it. Hey Quentin Tarantino, if you're listening, please do not run with that idea for your final movie. Jamie Foxx is O.J. Simpson, and Leonardo DiCaprio is Kato Kaelin in the 10th and final film from Quentin Tarantino, Juice Unloosed, coming next Christmas. Number 6, Serenity. After the failure of Ghosts of Girlfriends Past in 2009, it seemed as though Matthew McConaughey's movie stardom had finally come to an end. But after a series of acclaimed performances in indie movies and HBO's True Detective, which culminated with his Oscar-winning performance in Dallas Buyers Club, McConaughey's legendary comeback of the 2010s would be deemed by many as the McConaissance. Sadly, the last half of this decade would mark a noticeable decline in McConaughey's career, and the McConaissance would come to its unfortunate end with his performance in this baffling mystery thriller, with McConaughey playing a fishing boat captain in Florida who's approached by his ex-wife, played by McConaughey's Interstellar co-star Anne Hathaway, to go out to sea with her abusive new husband Jason Clarke and kill him off for the sum of $10 million. But even with McConaughey and Hathaway working under the helm of Oscar-nominated writer-director Stephen Knight, this simple film noir-esque plot would be completely unfurled by a narrative twist that would make even M. Night Shyamalan blush in embarrassment, as McConaughey finds out in the film's final act that he's actually a character in a video game, which has been developed by the autistic son he had with Anne Hathaway after McConaughey ended up dying in real life while serving over in Iraq, with his son using his dead dad's digital avatar as an excuse to kill the boy's abusive stepfather, both in the game and in real life.
Patrick!
And as hard as it may be to hear that plot twist without breaking out into uncontrollable laughter, it was even harder for the film studio to try and market this movie after its poor reception with test audiences, with Serenity quickly bombing at the box office as critics laughed hysterically over its absurd plot twist. Yet even though Serenity has provided a major speed bump in the career of Matthew McConaughey, I'm sure that he will find another acclaimed hit in his future that better suits his talents, and that the career of this Texan thespian will turn out alright. Number 5, Men in Black International. When the obscure comic book The Men in Black was turned into a big budget movie from director Barry Sonnenfeld in 1997 about a mismatched pair of secret government agents who scour the air for visiting space aliens and prevent people from discovering their existence, the result was a blockbuster hit thanks to its wide array of crazy alien designs and the dynamite chemistry between the grouchy Tommy Lee Jones and the wisecracking Will Smith. And although Sonnenfeld's 2 sequels with Jones and Smith did well at the box office, neither of them could quite recreate the magic of the first installment. So Sony Pictures thought the time was right for a new generation of Men in Black to revive the franchise, with director F. Gary Gray coming behind the camera this time, fresh off the success of Straight Outta Compton and The Fate of the Furious. And since the sequels badly reneged on their promise to bring a female into the Men in Black, this reboot would now bring in Tessa Thompson to replace Big Willie as this film's fresh-faced rookie agent who is trained to hunt down intergalactic scum. Plus, Thompson would be reunited with her Ragnarok and Endgame co-star Chris Hemsworth, trading in his hammer for a Neuralyzer as the veteran MIB agent who takes the new recruit under his wing in the agency's British division, with Liam Neeson in the role of their hard-ass chief. But Despite all of the promising talent attached to it, this new MIB movie would end up falling apart thanks to interference from the producer of the first 3 MIBs, Walter Parkes, who insisted on having the script constantly rewritten before and during filming, to the point that Thompson and Hemsworth had to hire their own dialogue writers, and conflicted so badly with F. Gary Gray over the direction of the film that Sony had to talk Gray out of abandoning the movie. And after test audiences were shown 2 different cuts of the final product, one from Walter Parkes and the other from F. Gary Gray, Sony decided to release the Walter Parkes cut to theaters. Unfortunately, the producer's cut of MIB International was a heartless and laughless piece of manufactured product, where the old Ragnarok chemistry between Tessa Thompson and Chris Hemsworth was nowhere to be found between their unlikable and undeveloped characters. As for Kumail Nanjiani providing them support as the voice of their sarcastic alien sidekick, his character was little more than the most obvious ploy for an easily merchandisable alien character since the goddamn Porgs. And despite Emma Thompson and Frank the Pug coming in for brief cameos from the original Men in Black trilogy, even they could not help the new MIB from quickly failing at the box office and shutting the franchise down for the immediate future. So perhaps Sony would have been better off if they had instead made a reboot of Men in Black who like to have sex with each other.
Hey, this alien looks just like a hot guy.
You're right, we better have sex with him.
Now freeze.
Number 4, Tyler Perry's A MADEA Family Funeral. This past year in cinema has been filled with many emotional farewells. The Avengers said goodbye to Iron Man, Woody rode off into the sunset with Bo Peep, and saddest of all, we bid one last hallelujah to Madea, as Tyler Perry announced he would finally be retiring his sassy female persona after her 11th installment. And even though Tyler Perry filmed this movie before the release of the Madea Halloween sequel, he did not want to release Madea's last movie so soon after Boo 2, and would instead spend 2018 releasing both his Taraji P. Henson thriller Acrimony and his Tiffany Haddish rom-com Nobody's Fool, which, to Tyler's credit, did not make the top 10 in last year's Worst Movies video, so great success. But even with the year-long anticipation building behind Madea's final movie, this installment proved to be no different than the previous ones, with Madea firing off snappy wisecracks in between melodramatic conflicts between her family members, which were easily solved with a visit to church. And as much as Tyler Perry had grown as a comedic performer over these past 14 years of Madea movies, the same could not be said for his still amateur skills as a screenwriter and director, with Family Funeral feeling as rushed and sloppy as you would expect from a movie which was shot in less than a week. But despite being an uneventful finale, A Madea Family Funeral was another sizable hit that opened with the 3rd best opening in Madea history. So it would not be a surprise if Tyler Perry decides to put the fat suit and floral dress back on for another movie. After all, the guy just got himself a Netflix deal, and we all know that Netflix loves to see themselves some black comedians wearing fat suits, so expect the future Netflix collaboration between Tyler Perry, Marlon Wayans, and Eddie Murphy to open up a portal to hell that will unleash the wrath of Algarth the Mecha Demon upon the face of the earth.
The earth is ours!
Number 3, Hellboy. When director Guillermo del Toro brought the satanic comic book anti-hero known as Hellboy to the big screen, his resulting 2 films proved to be fairly successful with audiences and critics, thanks to del Toro's beautifully realized world of goblins and demons, and Ron Perlman's pitch-perfect performance as the titular fallen demon turned paranormal investigator. But when Hellboy creator Mike Mignola finally began work on a 3rd Hellboy movie in 2014 without del Toro writing or directing from his own script, Guillermo would turn down an offer to produce the 3rd movie, and Ron Perlman followed suit in refusing to don the Hellboy makeup one final time. So from there, the Hellboy producers decided to reboot the franchise entirely, under the helm of director Neil Marshall, who had directed such modern-day horror classics as Dog Soldiers and The Descent, as well as the famous Blackwater episode of Game of Thrones. And the Hellboy makeup would be worn this time around by David Harbour, best known for playing Chief Jim Hopper in the Netflix series Stranger Things. But unlike the original 2 PG-13 rated films, this Hellboy reboot decided to go for an R rating, with far more bloody demon slaughter and plenty of swearing from Al Swearingen himself, Ian McShane, replacing the late John Hurt in the role of Hellboy's surrogate father, Professor Broom. Oh, and also we've got Mila Jovovich playing a witch or something. However, in going for an R rating, the Hellboy reboot tried so hard to be brutal and badass that it ended up trying too hard. and forgot to include any of the likable characters or sophisticated atmosphere which made the Del Toro Hellboys so great. And although David Harbour made a fine effort in making the Hellboy character his own, the poor guy had to put up with a hellish production process and a totally inconsistent script that was constantly rewritten during filming, with Harbour even walking off the set at one point, and director Neil Marshall not even allowed to supervise the film's final cut. So when the new Hellboy finally arrived in theaters, audiences and critics both decided to send it back to hell. And after the failure of both this disappointing reboot and last year's Pacific Rim sequel, Hollywood should learn by now not to follow up Guillermo del Toro's movies without the help of Guillermo del Toro himself. Oh, who am I kidding? Hollywood never learns a damn thing. So stay tuned for the upcoming release of The Shape of Water 2, Colonel Strickland's Island Adventure.
Sit down!
Number 2, Dark Phoenix. After director Matthew Vaughn successfully rebooted the X-Men franchise with First Class, and Bryan Singer triumphantly came back to the series with Days of Future Past, X-Men fans were truly optimistic that their beloved School of Mutants would be perfectly fine without the help of Marvel Studios. But then came the disappointment of X-Men Apocalypse. And then came Bryan Singer's dismissal from the franchise in the wake of his, personal issues. So after Disney bought up 20th Century Fox in 2017, the fans were eager for the X-Men franchise to go out with one last great movie before rebooting once more as part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And since Days of Future Past had wiped the disastrous events of The Last Stand from the series' timeline, it felt right that Fox's last X-Men movie would make another attempt at adapting the famous Dark Phoenix saga from the original comics, and get it right this time without Brett Ratner wiping his slimy ass all over it, with longtime X-Men screenwriter Simon Kinberg now upgrading to the director's seat for his directorial debut. But even though Kinberg was eager to undo all the mistakes he made in that first adaptation of the Dark Phoenix saga, he sadly ended up doing even worse on his second time around. For one thing, many of the returning actors such as Michael Fassbender and Jennifer Lawrence only came back for the final film at the behest of Simon Kinberg, and their performances would perfectly illustrate their complete lack of enthusiasm.
But nobody cares anymore.
Hell, Jennifer Lawrence doesn't even bother wearing the full body makeup for this movie.
Mutant and proud.
Mutant and proud, yeah, my ass. And were The Last Stand unceremoniously killed off or sidelined some of our favorite characters to get their actors out of the movie, Dark Phoenix would end up making the exact same mistake, with Quicksilver spending most of the movie unconscious, and Mystique being stabbed through the heart by the villainous Jean Grey. And since Sophie Turner had only been introduced to this franchise one movie ago, there were no emotional stakes in watching Jean Grey succumb to her dark side, with little help provided by Jessica Chastain playing a generic alien overlord who is the least intimidating villain that this franchise has seen since the Juggernaut, bitch! So after some last-minute reshoots for the third act and losing much of its marketing team in the wake of the Disney-Fox merger, it wasn't much of a surprise when Dark Phoenix was finally released to terrible reviews and weak box office, with Simon Kinberg taking responsibility for the film's failure, and longtime X-Men producer Lauren Schuler Donner taking to Twitter to wash her hands of the franchise's underwhelming finale. And although we're still waiting for that new Mutants movie, we can only hope the X-Men will rise once more like a phoenix from the ashes when they're reintroduced into the Marvel Universe. As for the future reboot of the Fantastic Four franchise, well, that, my friends, is another story.
The Thing Burger.
And now, for the number 1 worst movie of 2019, which wasn't Cats, as selected by the readers of JoBlo.com, Charlie's Angels. In 1976, famed TV producer Aaron Spelling introduced a groundbreaking detective series named Charlie's Angels, which told the adventures of a trio of female private detectives sent out to solve crimes and kick male chauvinist ass under the orders of their unseen millionaire boss. And the show proved to be an immediate hit, which opened new doors for females on TV and made an iconic sex symbol out of its star, Farrah Fawcett. Then the year 2000 would see Charlie's Angels being adapted into a hit blockbuster film, with its titular trio now played by Cameron Diaz, Drew Barrymore, and Lucy Liu, with the film being followed up 3 years later with a disappointing sequel and a downright terrible video game. So now that leads us up to Sony Pictures' latest film adaptation of Charlie's Angels, which would surely be a perfect franchise to reboot in this current era of female empowerment. And although Drew Barrymore would return as the executive producer of the new movie, the roles of the Angels were now filled here by a new generation of kick-ass women. Kristen Stewart, who had put the ashes of the Twilight franchise far behind her to become a respected actress. Naomi Scott, who had just broken through on the big screen as the Pink Power Ranger and the live-action Princess Jasmine. And Ella Balinska, who, really didn't do much before this movie, but hey, she's British! She sure is British. And this time we had not one Bosley assisting the Angels, but rather 3 Bosleys in one movie, played by Sir Patrick the Poop Stewart, Jimon Hansu, and the woman who also served as the film's co-writer and director, Elizabeth Banks. But as great of an actress as Elizabeth Banks is, the only full-length movie she had directed before this was Pitch Perfect 2, and her relative inexperience as a director was evident in the film's incomprehensible action scenes, while the comedic banter between the 3 angels left a whole lot to be desired.
She's out there riding a horse and somebody said, "When did you learn to ride a horse?" And she says, "More money, more horses." What the fuck does that mean?
And while the Destiny's Child theme song to the first Charlie's Angels movie was an immediate chart topper, the theme song for the new Charlie's Angels quickly vanished from cultural memory, despite the movie's trailer promoting the 3 singers of its theme song as prominently as its 3 lead actresses. So however bad or good this movie turned out, that didn't change the fact that nobody was asking for another Charlie's Angels. And that lack of interest resulted in very few men or women giving the new Charlie's Angels its wings. But although Elizabeth Banks may have pressed her luck with this failed reboot, she should be happy that she didn't end up directing the actual worst movie of 2019.
You live with LoQuisha.
No, I'm not talking about LaQuisha, I'm talking about Cats! That's right, Cats, you may not be number 1 on this list, but you will always be number 1 in our hearts and our litter boxes.
That's what I say to you.
And there you have them, folks, the top 10 worst movies of 2019 as selected by the JoBlo.com community. Perhaps I'll review one of these movies someday for Awfully Good Movies, which you can catch new episodes of here on the JoBlo Videos YouTube channel. Until next time, I'm Jesse Shade for JoBlo.com, wishing you all joy and happiness in the new decade. And we leave you once more with a list of the movies that didn't make the top 10, such as The Fanatic, starring John Travolta in his finest on-screen performance to date, speaking the poetic words of esteemed writer-director Frederick Durst. Take us home, Moose!
I can't talk too long. I gotta poo.
Moose is in the house. Watch out. Watch out. Poppycock.
London Bridge is right over there.
Poppycock.
I wish that Freddy Krueger would come and chop off your head, and it would roll in the street, and a truck would squish it, and the blood would splatter everywhere, and everyone would watch it.
You rock my head and you rattle my head. You rock it like I go to bed.
And by the way, the women are always saving the men around here. You might want to think about changing the name to ex-women.